Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Hello. Should I call you Independence? Buchanan County? I'll go with Independence. That's a great name. No, someone was telling me that you all are the county that swung most from Obama to Trump, perhaps in the entire country. I don't know if you all knew that. That makes this place one of the most important places in our country, in my opinion. And not just because we're in Iowa, which is going to turn this country in a whole new direction on February 3rd in 16 short days. I did the math. Do you know how many Californians each Iowan is worth? 1,000 each. That's right. So if you look around this room today, I'm going to give a Trumpian estimate. There are at least 400 people in this room. It's the biggest room ever. This is one football stadium worth of Californians right here. This is the power you all have to move this country in a new direction. And I have to say, you have a power that other Americans only dream of. Because other Americans look up and they see our government as a series of pipes clogged with millions and millions of dollars of lobbyist cash, and they despair that there is nothing they can do about it. They are correct. There is nothing they can do about it. You are the only people in the entire country that can flush the pipes clean. That's one reason why I love campaigning here so much. It's because you all have the ability to solve the problems that are driving the rest of this country into the ground. Now, you probably gathered I'm not a professional politician. I'm something of an accidental presidential candidate. I spent the last number of years running a nonprofit that helped create jobs around the country. And I give full credit to my wife for letting me do that. How many of you all work in a nonprofit now? How many of you volunteer at a nonprofit? You should probably pretend on that second one. That's like, are you nice? I am nice. There was that one time I did that nice thing. So I started this nonprofit right after the financial crisis. I felt like the financial crisis was such a train wreck for our country. Was your community here in this part of Iowa hard hit 12 years ago? I don't know. First, how many of you were actually here in 2008, 2009? Let's try that. So you were here. Do you remember that time? Like, how was that period? A 14-year-old boy raised his hand at another event and said it was really hard. And I said, how would you remember? You must have been 3 or 4. And he said that, well, we had to sell the house. So I remember. I saw that our economy had crashed because we had all of these wannabe whiz kids on Wall Street coming up with mortgage-backed securities and derivatives and financial instruments. And I thought that's the opposite of what this country needs. What we should be doing is sending people to start businesses in places like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, and around the country. So I quit my job to start a nonprofit to do just that in 2011. I said, well, I can do something about this. I'm an entrepreneur. And my organization helped create thousands of jobs around the country over the next number of years. It was so successful, I got to bring my wife to meet the president a couple of times. So my in-laws were very excited about me that week. They said, she must have done all right. But unfortunately, while I was traveling the country doing this work and getting clapped on the back, I felt like things were going in the wrong direction instead of the right direction in many, many parts of the country. And then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Now, if you're here tonight, you probably were not excited by that outcome. How did you react when Donald Trump won? Tears? Shock? All right with it. And you're not alone. We know that, so this county went to Trump more than just about any other county in the entire country. And Donald Trump won Iowa by almost 10 points. So we all have family members and friends and neighbors who were very excited about his victory, even though some people reacted with shock and surprise and sadness. To me, it was a clear red flag that tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star as our president, in part because we were so fed up with our politicians. We looked up and said, these politicians are not actually in our corner. Whose corner are they in? The lobbyists, the corporate interests, the people that are actually making Washington, D.C. the richest city in our country today. Think about it. How the heck is that town the richest city in our country? What are they producing? No one knows. So this is one reason why Trump won, why you are not alone. I have family members, friends, neighbors who looked up and said, hey, anything is going to be better than what we're getting right now. And if you were to turn on cable news, why would you think that so many people right here in Iowa voted for Trump and he won this state by almost 10 points? If you were to turn on cable news, why would you think that happened? Hillary Clinton, emails, what else? Russia, Facebook maybe, FBI maybe, racism perhaps. But I'm a numbers guy, independents. You can tell by the math lapel pin. And when I went through the numbers, there was a very clear reason why Trump won here in Iowa and in Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Missouri. It was the fact that we blasted away 4 million manufacturing jobs that were in all of those places, including 40,000 right here in Iowa. And you all have been to those towns. After the manufacturing jobs dried up, the shopping center and shopping district closed, and then people started to leave. Ohio, Michigan, Western Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and right here in Iowa. And what we did to those manufacturing jobs, we are now doing to your retail jobs, your call center jobs, your fast food jobs, and eventually your trucking jobs, and on through the economy. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in Independence? Are there stores closing? And why are those stores closing? Amazon. Well, it was Walmart. Walmart came and mowed down all of the small businesses, and now it's the internet coming in. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in business every year, closing 30% of our stores and malls. Most common job in the economy is retail clerk. The average retail clerk is a 39-year-old woman making between $8 and $12 an hour. After her store closes, what is her next job going to be? Unclear. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? 0. That is the math. 20 billion out, 30% of stores closed, you get 0. That is why it feels like you are getting sucked dry, because you are getting sucked dry by the biggest companies in the economy that are paying 0 back in taxes. So you can see these changes when the stores close. They're also more subtle than that. When you all call the customer service line of a big company and you get the software or bot on the other line, what do? I'm sure you do the same thing I do, which is you pound 000, say human, representative, human, until you get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. Oh yeah, we all do that, because as soon as you hear the software, you're like, oh no, this is terrible. I need to get a person on the line. In 2 or 3 years, though, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, peppy. What is that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work at call centers right now, making between $10 and $14 an hour? You might have seen the self-serve kiosks in the McDonald's and the grocery store and these different places, but the rubber is really going to hit the road when the trucks start driving themselves. How many of you know a truck driver here in Iowa? It's the most common job in 29 states. Average truck driver is a 49-year-old man. My friends in California are working on robot trucks that can drive themselves. They tell me they're 98% of the way there. A robot truck just transported 20 tons of butter from California to Pennsylvania 3 weeks ago with no human intervention. Why did they choose butter for this voyage? I have no idea. But if you Google robot butter truck, you will see the story. What is this going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers in our country, or the 7 million Americans who work at truck stops, motels, and diners that rely upon the truckers getting out and having a meal every day? How many of you have been to Iowa 80 in Davenport? Yeah, the buffet is above average. Now, it says on the wall, 5,000 people stop at Iowa 80 every day. What will that number be if the trucks don't have drivers? A lot less than 5,000. We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, and I'm going to suggest that Independence and Iowa are like ground zero for these changes. You saw it happen to a large extent on the farms, where a lot of those jobs got mechanized and automated and consolidated, so the family farms got combined. Then you saw it happen to your manufacturing jobs. Again, we blast away 40,000 manufacturing jobs, and the nature of the jobs is changing all the time. Whereas it used to be, if you went in and you had a good attitude and high school degree, you could have a middle-class life. Now today, to the extent there are manufacturing jobs, they look very, very different because a lot of the work is being done by machines, and you'll be more likely to need to be on a laptop than actually putting something together. Now it's coming to retail districts, main streets around the state. Eventually it will hit the highways. This is what the future holds, not just for you all here in Iowa, but all of the states that went to Trump in 2016 in the Midwest that are the subject of these changes. My first move was not to run for president of the United States. After I went through the numbers and I found that this is what's happening, my first move was to go to our leaders in D.C. and say, what are we going to do to help our people manage this transition? And what do you think the folks in D.C. said to me when I said, what are we going to do? Now you're laughing because you kind of have a sense of what's going on in D.C. Someone at another event made that Scooby-Doo noise where they're like, ooh, 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 row, row. The three main responses I got in D.C. were these. We cannot talk about that. Yeah, that was helpful. We should study that further. Do you want to guess what the success rates were for the government-funded retraining programs for the manufacturing workers? Now, you laugh, and you know it's low because I'm anchoring you low, but you know it's low because you also know people. If you have 1,000 manufacturing workers who get laid off, do they all walk out and be like, I'm here for my coding school now, and give me another 6 months of coding school and I'll be ready to code? Like, of course not. That's not the real world. The success rates of those government-funded retraining programs for the manufacturing workers were between 0 and 15%. They're a total dud. Of those people that lost their manufacturing jobs in the Midwest, almost half left the workforce and never worked again. Of that group, half filed for disability. You then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in those communities to the point where our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row as a country, nationwide. You know the last time America's life expectancy declined 3 years in a row? Depression is a very good guess. You have to go even further back. It's the Spanish flu of 1918, a global pandemic that killed millions. You have to go back 100 years, in part because it's highly unusual for life expectancy to ever decline in a developed country. We're supposed to get richer, stronger, healthier. That's what happens in every other country. But here in the U.S., we've gone down and then down and then down again. So when I said this to the folks in D.C., they had very little for me. But one person said something that sent me here to you all tonight. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town. No one here is going to do anything about this because fundamentally this is a town of followers, not leaders. And the only way we will do something about it is if you were to create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. And I said, challenge accepted. I will be back with the wave in 2 years. So it's been a long 2 years, Independence. I've been coming here to Iowa every month for the last 2 years. And I got to say, it's thrilling to be at this point where we have the chance to actually take this message back to D.C. and retake our government for us, the people of this country. I'm right now 5th in the polls and rising to be the Democratic nominee. We raised $16.5 million last quarter in increments of only $35 each. So my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But there's no corporate PAC money in there. It's just ordinary Americans saying we need to take back our government and make it work for us. And the question is, after we get a hold of our government, what's the plan? How can we rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us and our people? Raise your hand if you're a parent like me and my wife, Evelyn. If you have your hand up, you have had this sinking feeling that we are leaving our kids a future that is less stable, less secure, and less prosperous than the lives that we have led. We feel that way because it is that way. If you were born in the 1940s in the United States of America, there was a 93% chance you were going to be better off than your parents were. That's the American dream. That is what has fueled us for so long. That is what brought my family here. If you were born in the 1990s in this country, you were down to a 50-50 shot, and it is declining fast. That is why parents feel the way we do, because that is the reality. And that reality is what got Donald Trump elected in 2016, is that so many of us look at the future and do not believe it is going to be brighter than what has gone before. This is what you all must change. You actually have the power to make it so that we can look our kids in the eyes and say, we love you, we value you, and your country's going to invest in you in your future. Now, what does that investment really look like? If you're here tonight, at some point you've heard that someone is running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Maybe you even saw it in a TV ad. Raise your hand if you saw a TV ad. That makes me very happy because we spent a lot of money on those ads. No one had their hand up. I'd have to knock some heads. Now, I know the first time you saw this $1,000 a month proposal, you thought that's too good to be true, that's a gimmick, that will never happen. I understand. But this is not my idea, and it's not a new idea. Thomas Paine was for this at the founding of the country, called it the citizens' dividend for all Americans. Martin Luther King, whose son I met with in Atlanta, was fighting for this in the 1960s. It is what he was fighting for when he was killed in 1968. It's called the guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. 1,000 economists, including Milton Friedman, one of the fathers of modern economics, endorsed this plan in the 60s. It passed the House twice under Nixon in the 70s. And then in the 80s, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? And how does Alaska pay for it? And what is the oil of the 21st century? Data, technology, AI, self-driving cars and trucks. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you saw that study? How many of you got your data check in the mail this month? If our data is now worth billions of dollars a year, where is all that money going? Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple, and the trillion-dollar tech companies that are paying zero or next to zero back into our society. See what the game is? When we talk about rewriting the rules, we have to recapture the value that is getting sucked out of our communities and then put it back into our hands. If we get our tiny fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, eventually every robot truck mile and AI work unit, we can easily afford $1,000 a month for every American. Particularly because after you get this money, where is it going to go? How are you going to spend it in real life? How much of it's going to stay right here in Iowa? Most of it. Not all of it. You might get your own Netflix password instead of just passing the same one around all the time. But most of it would go to car repairs you've been putting off, and daycare expenses, and Little League signups, and local nonprofits, and religious organizations, maybe even Democratic Party dues if there's a, I think that was Dan's thing. This is the trickle-up economy from our people, our families, and our communities up. This would give our kids a real path forward. This would also make it so our kids don't feel like they have to leave the town or the state in order to access better opportunities. This is what you can all make real just like that in 16 days. We're getting all these messages about how great things are all the time. Record high corporate profits, record high GDP. But if your corporate profits are going up and your life expectancy is going down, which do you listen to? We know which one DC is listening to. They can't even see people in life expectancy. They just see the dollar signs. One of my key proposals is I believe we should have term limits for the people that we send to Washington. If you go to Washington, your job should be to do work on our behalf and then come home. Your job should not be to crouch as long as possible and try and absorb more of all the goodies that DC bestows upon you. As your president, I will do your work for 8 years, and then I will leave the next day, and you will never hear from me again. So we're getting all these messages about how great things are, record high corporate profits, also at record highs in the United States right now. Stress, financial insecurity, student loan debt, mental illness and depression, drug overdoses and substance abuse, record lows, business formation among young people, marriage, having a kid. The fundamental acts of optimism that fuel a healthy society are now at record lows. But of course, corporate profits are doing great. You see the divide? What we have to do is actually unify the way we're measuring economic progress and our own well-being. Instead of saying somehow that these corporate profits are a proxy for how we're doing, we should actually measure how we're doing. As your president, I will say, look, GDP, 100 years old. Even the inventor said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should never use it as that. And here we are riding it off a cliff 100 years later. Robot trucks will be very, very good for GDP and corporate profits. They're going to be very, very bad for a lot of Americans. So instead of using these as our measuring stick, we should be measuring health and life expectancy, income and affordability, childhood success rates, clean air and clean water, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, the proportion of Americans who can retire in quality circumstances. These will be the measurements of the economy under my presidency, and I will present them to you each year at the State of the Union. I'll be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck and show the real numbers. And if you had the real numbers, you would see we're in the midst of a mental health crisis, we're in the midst of a wellness crisis, we're in the midst of a civic engagement depression. All of the things that you'd want to see in a healthy society are heading downward. And I know how messed up the economic numbers are because of my own family. My wife is at home with our 2 boys every day, one of whom is autistic. How much is her work valued at in our economic measurements every day or every year? That gets a 0. And it's not just Evelyn and stay-at-home parents around the country. It's caregivers who are taking care of ailing loved ones. They get a 0 too. Volunteers and activists trying to make things better, 0. Coaches and mentors trying to help the next generation, 0. The vast majority of our artists, it's called 98% of artists, 0. Increasingly local journalism, 0. We put almost 2,000 local newspapers out of business over the last number of months because all of their advertising revenue went up to the cloud. You know what doesn't work as well if you don't have local news? Democracy. Because how the heck are you going to vote on what's going on in your town if there's no one actually covering what's going on in your town? These are the things that we in America claim to value most highly. Our families, our communities, our democracy, and we're allowing them to get zeroed out one by one by one. This is what you all must reverse in 16 days. We have to say to our fellow Americans that economic value and human value are not the same things, and that we and our children all have intrinsic value as Americans, as citizens, and as human beings ourselves. That's the message, independence. That's what we have to make clear as quickly as possible to turn this tide. Imagine if we miss this opportunity, what happens over the next 4 years? More of the store's lights go out. Artificial intelligence gets stronger and smarter. The robot trucks start hitting the highways. We have to take this opportunity right now to turn the tide. We have to solve the actual problems that got Donald Trump elected. And I think Democrats are making a grievous error by acting as if Donald Trump is the source of all of our problems. He's obviously not. The problems existed before Donald Trump came along, and that's what we have to focus on actually addressing in our communities. Donald Trump said he was going to make America great again. It was a very simple and powerful message. What did Hillary Clinton say in response? America's already great. You remember that? I know it's been a long 3 years, independence, but it's about to end. That response did not go over very well because for millions of Americans, they thought, wait, the problems are real. We need to acknowledge our problems and their depth and severity, but then we need real solutions that would actually move our country forward. What were Donald Trump's solutions? Build a wall, turn the clock back, bring the oil jobs back. Independents, you know we have to do the opposite. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society to rise to the real challenges of the 21st century. We have to evolve in the way we see ourselves and our work and our value and provide a brighter future for our kids. I am the ideal candidate for this job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who liked math. Now, some of you don't know this, but math is an acronym, and what does it stand for? Make America think harder. That's right, independents. That is your job in 16 days. It is your job to move this entire country, not left, not right, but forward. And I know that is just where you're going to lead us in a couple short weeks. Thank you all so much. I'm looking forward to taking some questions. Conrad, go ahead. I have kids myself, so I appreciate you. You have to do something. It's all good. Hello.
Hi there. I'm a union employee, and my family has benefited from very good health care. A lot of candidates are talking Medicare for all. Is your solution opt-in or Medicare for those who want it? Or what will happen to people like me who have very good health benefits and want to keep their private health benefits?
Thanks for the question. How many of you are in unions like him? Yeah. One of my first trips here to Iowa, a guy named Chris Larson who works at the UAW gave me a documentary, a CD for a documentary, DVD. It was called Brothers on the Line. I don't know if you've seen this documentary. It's about the formation of the UAW. And I watched it with my wife, and it was so edifying because you saw just how hard people his brother got shot in his own home, and they just kept on going. They kept on fighting, and they turned unions into this pillar of the American middle class that helped transform millions of workers' lives for the better. Now, what has happened since then? Union membership has slipped and slipped and slipped. The way I see unions is as like a fortress against the storm. But what's happened is that the fortress has been under attack for years, and the storm has gotten stronger. So one of the main things that unions has done for workers is negotiated for better health care plans and health care benefits. And the last thing I or any candidate, in my opinion, should want to do is do anything that would touch those plans, because you literally gave away wages for those plans in negotiations years ago. My plan for health care is this. We have to go to the American people and say, hey, we're going to try and get health care off your backs. We need universal health care in this country. We're going to have a government plan that everyone can access. But of course, we're not going to force you to do it. If you're on a plan that you like, stay there. If you don't have coverage, then you can give this government plan a shot. And if someone else also wants to give it a shot, please do, because we're going to try and make it as compelling and competitive as possible, and over time even make it better than the private offerings that are out there. But that's the way we have to make the case to the American people, is by demonstrating that value and out-competing. So in your case, you would have your coverage exactly as is, and maybe over time we could convince you that you might want to give this other plan a try, but you probably never would, because the union plan has been working for you and your family, and that's as it should be. It would be incredibly disruptive to go to millions of Americans and say, hey, these plans that you've used and these providers and all these arrangements that you've made that work for your family, we're going to change them. We're going to legislate them away. We're going to change the situation for millions of Americans. I think that is the wrong way to go. That is certainly not the way I would lead. I want to do more for Americans in the healthcare and not take things away. That said, what's going on in our healthcare system is a real problem. Make the drug companies, the device companies, the insurance companies lots and lots of money. Not really designed to make us stronger and healthier. We have to try and help change those incentives over time for the providers. Because if more of those resources were actually going to ways to make us and our families stronger and healthy, we'd just be much, much better off. I'm a numbers guy. We're spending $3.6 trillion a year on our health care. About $1 trillion of it is waste. But when I say waste, it's waste that's benefiting the drug companies, the device companies, and the private insurance companies. Imagine if there was an extra $1 trillion going into our hands to make our lives better. That's the equivalent of something like several $1,000s a year per person. Imagine if your government just said, hey, here's a couple $1,000s, but the only condition is you have to do something that's good for you. Wouldn't that be the greatest thing in the world? That's the level of waste we have in our system. That we could legitimately just be going to you and being like, get whatever the heck you'd want that would make your life better and easier and stronger and healthier. I mean, that's where we have to try and steer. I'm going to tell a story from my own family. My father-in-law had a stroke a number of years ago. And then they said to him, hey, you're going to be on blood thinners the rest of your life. And here are these drugs. And he heard that and he said, you know what? I'd really like to try and modify my diet and my lifestyle. So he went and said, can I see a dietitian? And then the insurance company said, no, we will not pay for a dietitian, but we will pay for these drugs that will cost thousands and thousands of dollars like for the rest of your life. And he said, wait a minute, I'm trying to save you money. I'm trying to see the dietitian and do something that's problematic. It'll be easier on my body. Eventually, he just paid for the dietitian himself out of pocket. But think about how messed up a system that is. That insurance company should be like scrambling, saying, please go to the dietitian, because if you do this, it'll save society a ton of money. But instead, they denied the dietitian and said, we're going to ask you to take drugs the rest of your life. That's our system in a nutshell. I want to pay the dietitian. You know what I mean? I think the patient wants you to pay the dietitian too. Conrad, go ahead and pass it around. Yeah.
Wow, it's sensitive, Mike. I was a Trump voter in 2016, and I remember at the time there was, this question's about gun control. A lot of people in this area, they are hunters and sportsmen, and sometimes they just enjoy their firearms for hunting, and I suppose there would be some that would say just for home protection, things like that. There's been fears in the past and a lot of discussion about how Democrats are going to take our guns. Democrats are going to take guns and come and take them, and I think we've even heard our president say that very recently.
Yeah, I think you did.
We need to balance. I'm wondering how we are going to balance that desire to be free and the desire for the Second Amendment versus, we see the violence in the schools and things like that. So how do we balance that interest as far as from a presidential standpoint?
Thank you for the question. I think we need to have really honest conversations about what gun violence is and means in this country. Almost 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. And so the person that's most affected is the gun owner, him or herself. And one thing I know as a human being, if we all had self-destruct buttons on our bodies, we would have hit them at some point in a moment of shame or weakness or guilt. But then the moment passes and you're just like, oh, well, glad I don't have a self-destruct button. But for some gun owners, they make a choice that's irrevocable and tears their family apart that they would have rethought literally moments later. So when I talk about gun control or gun safety, I'm trying to get people to be in a point where the worst effects of gun violence aren't as common, while recognizing that it is, frankly, completely unrealistic to imagine that you're going to somehow take people's guns away from them in a real way. So I'm for a perpetual buyback of firearms in this country that's entirely voluntary. And then if you get tired of a gun, you can trade it in and we'll give you money to do that. I'm for upgrades to firearms that will make it so that the gun is personalized to you through a palm print or something if you want. And this might make your gun safer because then if your kid gets a hold of it, then they can't do anything with it. But all of these things in my mind are voluntary. And a discussion where you say that to a law-abiding gun owner who's using it as a sportsman or hunter, like that's going to be the case for generations, in my view. So we need to focus on the common ground that Americans, I believe, can get behind, which does include certain gun safety regulations that most of us agree on, like universal background checks and red flag laws. But that has nothing to do with the ownership rights of an American who's just using a gun, like, in a law-abiding way for sport or otherwise. I would invest massive resources in a mental health infrastructure. Go back to the original point around the fact that suicides overtaking vehicle deaths in this country, to me, is a giant crisis. And the trends are getting worse, not better. And so if you have literally a suicide epidemic in your country, which we do have, then you need to try and invest resources to make that better. And again, that's almost 2/3 of gun deaths. So I would want to have that conversation in America, saying if you want to focus on gun violence, we need to try and make our families stronger, and also have a conversation around the fact that the problems are affecting boys and men to higher degrees. And when you talk about shooters, you're talking about boys and men 95, 98% of the time. I have 2 young boys myself, one of whom is autistic, and I know that if you have the wrong boy in the wrong school, that's very, very bad, generally for the boy, but sometimes for people in the community. And so what does that mean? We have to try and get resources into the family's hands. We have to try and get resources into the school so that if you have kids, boys in particular, who have different learning profiles, that they don't feel like they're getting punished or marginalized every day in school, but that the school actually has resources to say, this is not an assembly line. Your kid is different. We're going to have someone work with that kid at their own pace. And we actually have the resources to do that because it's not a student-to-teacher ratio of 30-to-1. Because the federal government will pay for having special needs educators in your schools. Now, people don't think of that as a gun violence question, but to me, it's all connected. All these problems are connected. If you want to try and impact gun violence, you would start at the family, and then go to the school, and then go to the mental health infrastructure. Then you'd go to the nonprofits and economy in our towns, and then you would go to gun control, like in terms of actual gun safety regulations. It's all a giant chain, and you have to try and attack every link at the chain to improve circumstances rather than saying guns, guns, guns. I mean, I think there's common ground on gun safety regs that respect people's Second Amendment rights.
One thing I love about your platform, Andrew, is that everything seems to combine and layer on top of one another, whether it's healthcare, the $1,000 dividend, everything.
Oh, thank you, brother.
Woven in. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm just a parent who wants to try and humanize our economy and way of life for us and our kids. I see it's heading the wrong direction. We have to do better. I've seen the future that lies ahead for your kids and mine. It is not something I am willing to accept. You should not accept it either. And unlike everyone else in the country, you actually have the power to change it. Only people in the country who can say, you know what? We genuinely need to do something different that actually invests in our people and our kids. We have to stop acting like we all work for the machine. The machines work for us. Our economy works for us. We're the richest, most advanced country in the history of the world, $21 trillion a year and counting. We bailed out the Wall Street banks for $4 trillion. Do you remember voting for that? Oh, we laugh. None of us would have voted for that. Or how about this one? America, would you rather bail out the Wall Street banks for $4 trillion, or would you rather keep Americans in their homes? Which would you have chosen? Keep people in their homes, please. Like, no. Let's choose the banks. That's what they did 12 years ago. I was so disgusted, I quit my job, started a nonprofit, and ran it for 7 years to try and wash off the stink. And I had nothing to do with it. I was just in the same town. Really. Like, it was just so corrupt And if we had gotten that right, in my mind, we'd be in so much better shape as a country today, but people saw what happened, saw that no one went to jail, no one took accountability, everyone just walked home with their giant bags of money, acted like, I don't know, who could have known, and here we are. Here we are where if you're an individual parent or family and you run into hard times, your fault on your own. If you're a drug company, you get into hard times, like, we can't run to you with bags of money fast enough. Bank, same thing. Like, that's the way our country has become. Our government has been overrun by that. You know, I mean, you all see it. That's one reason I was excited to talk to you all, because this is, like, you all are the swingiest of the swing counties in the swingiest state in the country. You know, like, Iowa is straight up and down purple. And to me, if you're a Democrat, you have to look up and say, how the heck do you lose the swingiest, purplest state by almost 10 points? You must really be doing something wrong. I haven't heard Democrats say that. It's driving me nuts. You know, it's like they act like Donald Trump's like out of the blue. It's like, well, if you guys were like actually leading in a more genuine way, then like people would feel like government's on your side instead of on the side of the freaking corporate interests, all just there like passing money back and forth. Anyway, just to give you a sense of where I am. But I'm genuinely just like another citizen who sees the problems, and they are all very much like linked to each other. Dan.
I just have a, whoa, that is sensitive. I just have a minor question. My kid works in the ag industry, and he told his friends that he works with that you were coming to town. They're like, well, that guy's really cool, but he's against meat. And I have no idea where that's coming from, and I was hoping you could just clarify that so he can go back to work and say, no, you should check this guy out.
Oh, well, thank you for the question. I think I had a burger today. I quite love them. So the only place I can think of where that would come from is I believe that we need to put a price on pollution in order to help move us towards a more sustainable economy away from climate change. And so to a question someone asked, it's like, hey, if you have like an ag business that produces a lot of emissions, then I say, yeah, you should have fee on carbon, but it's literally measured in the ton, and it would like change prices on something like, you know, like this much initially to help us transition towards renewable source of energy. And it doesn't single out like meat or ag in the least. Like most of what it's thinking of is frankly the giant smokestacks that are emitting like tons of stuff in like the industries. Like it's pretty much thinking about the fossil fuel companies and the rest of it. And then someone said, hey, could you apply that to ag? It's like, yeah, but like the level of emissions like we're talking about are like much, much higher from all these things over here. So I like meat. I eat it every day. I plan on continuing to do so. You know, like I do have team members who are vegetarian and vegan. And what I think to myself is like, good for you, I could never do it. And I'm probably like many Americans in that respect. I'll stop there. So you can tell if I like meat a great deal, and I expect to eat it for a very, very long time.
Yeah, thanks. Cool.
Last question. Andrew Yang doesn't like meat today. How did you change that?
All right, you've expressed several things that you'd like to do as president, but to do a lot of those, we're going to have to get legislation through Congress and the Senate. So what's your plan to make sure that Iowa would elect a Democratic senator to replace one of our Republicans, and we keep control of the Congress, and we also get control of the Senate? Because if we don't do that, I'm afraid we're not going to go anyplace.
Thank you for the question. I love it, and I couldn't agree more. That you need to fight for races down ballot, especially, I mean, Senate seats. Those are crucially important. So I want you all to play out with me how this picture looks. You all start voting 16 days from now. Shock the world. Andrew Yang wins Iowa. Those headlines rocket around the country and the entire world February 4th. People will be like, what just happened? Like Andrew Yang wins Iowa. And then we go to New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina win, I'm your president a year from now. Now, Democrats and progressives will be so thrilled to have beaten Donald Trump that they'll be super excited to try and get money into the hands of families around the country to make our kids stronger, healthier. But then Republicans and conservatives will look up and say, wait a minute, how do I feel about cash in people's hands? And Alaska, the state that's passed a dividend for decades now, that was passed by a Republican governor in a deep red state. They'll be like, conservatives, and I sense there are some of you in this room that resemble this, conservatives don't hate money in people's hands. What they hate is a giant bureaucracy that makes everyone's decisions for them. And cash in people's hands is obviously the former. So we can get this dividend passed and put it into people's hands. To your question about how we have Democrats succeed around the country, I think one of the gaps in the Obama administration was investing in down-ballot races, making sure that you actually had strength in different places. I think that this message that we have to humanize the economy would be very, very effective here in Iowa and would help Democrats at every level. I genuinely see Iowa as ground zero for many of these economic changes, and understanding the economic changes is crucial. Most of this state is rural. When you talk to Democrats, what is your plan to revitalize rural areas? There is very, very little that they're bringing to the table. The main thing they will bring to the table is to say everyone needs broadband access, which I 100% agree with. We should get 99.9% of Americans broadband access, and I can get that done within my first term. But realistically, if you have high-speed broadband, that does not create jobs in your communities. That means that you can watch videos faster, like send things back and forth, but it's not a job creator. So when I spoke to the state legislators here in Iowa, and I presented the plan for the Freedom Dividend, a number of them came up to me and said, this is the only thing I have seen that would actually work to revitalize rural parts of this state. So if you take this message to folks here in Iowa, then all of a sudden I believe Democrats can succeed statewide much, much more effectively. Because this is a solution that people can understand and touch and feel and would actually improve our way of life. This is, to me, what the Democratic Party has been missing. Because the Democratic Party is proposing solutions that people don't really believe in. Where if you say, hey, we're going to improve this system, we're going to improve this program, we're going to improve this, a lot of Americans are like, you know what? I'm not sure that government program is really going to touch my life in this way. But if Democrats start standing for it, we want to put money into your family's hands to make you stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, that's a winning message. If we get that message here in Iowa, then I believe Democrats can compete better here, and they can compete all throughout the states that Trump won, and then we can start moving our country in the right direction. So hopefully you can see this as a bipartisan vision, because this is very non-ideological. It's very solutions-oriented. And Republicans don't mind me because they sense that I am non-ideological. There was one survey that said that 18% of college Republicans would vote for me over Trump. Another survey said that 10% of Trump voters in New Hampshire would vote for me over Trump. And I'm the only candidate in the Democratic field that Trump has never tweeted about. And think about that for a sec. Like, he knows who I am. I know he knows who I am because his advisor literally said, if there's one candidate we're worried about, it's Yang. Just today, odds came up on the internet gambling market that said that I am a heavy favorite to beat Trump in the general if I'm the nominee. You know the people that have not woken up to this yet? I don't know, some people in the media, some other folks. But I'll tell you, if we win Iowa, then the entire thing wakes up and it's like, oh my gosh. Because what's the number one criteria that Democrats have for the nominee? Beat Trump. By the numbers, I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump. I'm getting 10 to 20% of his supporters. He doesn't want to touch me. He knows I'm better at the internet than he is. And what are his most effective attacks? You're a creature of Washington. You're you're corrupt. You're like da-da-da. Like, none of that stuff works on me. You know, I'm like the anonymous Asian guy who just came out of nowhere and just said, hey, let's give people money and get on with the business of solving problems. Like, that's a tough foil for him. as more people wake up to this, you're going to see us rise and rise. But it does come back to what you're describing, which is trying to get the country together to get things done in Washington, D.C. That is the vision. That's the mission. All right, thank you all so much. I'd love to meet you individually, take some pictures if you'd like, but let's move this country forward in 16 days. Give me a sensitive mic. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. This mic is just right. Thank you all.
Law school. They're from the Twin Cities. And what did your husband always do every year, Sally, when we were? That's right, with his friends. Maybe they went to a few bars. 36 years in a row. That's what, yes, I'm not kidding. They would go to the Quad Cities. That is a true story. So anyway, it is wonderful to see you. And I actually started my day, well, yesterday when there was that blizzard in Minnesota. We had our early voting starting. It was so much snow, and we were at First Avenue. And so I had to decide, the flights were all canceled, and I wanted to get down here to speak to the teachers in Des Moines. So we went on this journey that we finally got to Des Moines very carefully, driving at 2 in the morning. I have had 3.5 hours sleep, so I'm sure I'll make some mistake that they'll put up forever. And I, since then, have been going. We've had amazing events in Coralville, and the teachers in Des Moines, and then in Clinton. And here we are now. And the fact that you are turning out on this cold, cold night, if for any reason your car doesn't start, our field organizers will start it. Is that not correct? And no, I didn't ask them that first. But we just want to thank you for doing that. So we are having this incredible moment in our campaign at the right time. One of my friends wrote with the bad autocorrect and said, "Congratulations on your insurgency." She meant surge in your campaign. We have doubled our field staff in Iowa. We've been going up in the polls. We just had in New Hampshire a 10% poll, which is only 4 points less than a number of other candidates, including the vice president. And so things are really changing for us at a rapid pace. I found out I already made on day one the next debate in February. There was an article in the Washington Post. I was laughing this morning about how much the candidates mentioned states. And it really was a sort of a neutral article. But it was, I think it's good when you mention states. So I actually got the prize. I mentioned states 49 times in the debates total. I think it was like 13 was Iowa. And I finally thought to myself, that's because I think you should, as a president, understand where you are and have a sense of the issues, that they're not one size fits all, and be able to get things done for people. We are actually, I'd say one of the things that distinguishes me is from the very beginning, from when I announced in the middle of that snowstorm with 4 inches of snow on my head, and I said we needed to cross the river of our divides to a higher place in our politics. I've really been on the same footing, on the same strong footing from the very beginning of this campaign, and I think that has mattered to people. I will start by just reminding people of one thing, and that is that on that debate stage we have some disagreements, but there is still more that unites us and divides us. And a lot of the debates we have up there are about economics, right? What's the best approach? What's the best approach to education? What's the best approach to funding infrastructure? What's the best approach for health care? And those are all valid arguments. But in the end, one of the things we don't want to forget here, for the kind of people we need to bring with us. When I was in Clinton, that county, listen to this, Barack Obama won it by 20 points. And then Donald Trump goes in and wins it by 5. And so I have a feeling in that very room where I was speaking, there were people that had probably done that. There are a lot, every time I ask them in that county, so people I'm talking to, they're like, yes, we do. And so we want to remember that not everyone who's going to vote out there disagrees with every single thing that's said on that debate stage. I don't agree with everything that's said on that debate stage. But one of the things we do agree on in a big way is that America's heart is so much bigger than that guy in the White House, so much bigger than his heart. What we do agree on, and this includes a lot of independents and moderate Republicans as well, What we do agree on is that this election is not just an economic check, it is also a values check. It is a decency check. It is a patriotism check. It is that moment when our president was standing at the G20 next to a ruthless dictator, Vladimir Putin, and a reporter asked him about interference in our election from a foreign government. And despite what all of the intelligence people said, he looked at that dictator and he made a joke about it. And when I saw that, I thought, hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives on the battlefields just standing up for democracy, our democracy and democracies around the world. That's what World War II was about. When I saw that, I thought about those 4 little innocent girls in that church in Birmingham, Alabama, at the height of the civil rights movement, who lost their lives simply because people were trying to expand that democracy, to have that democracy cover other people, including those innocent girls. And other people were trying to push it away from them. So many of the great moments and the worst moments in our country are about that democracy, our Constitution. That is a defining quality of America. And our president, he stood on the world stage and he made a joke about it. That is what I'm talking about with the patriotism check. The other piece of this is a decency check. The simple idea that parents want to be able to tune in and watch our president make an address. Even if they didn't vote for her or him, they want to be able to watch that without putting on the mute button when their kids walk in the room. That's what a lot of families have to do. And you remember the day, some people do, when we used to watch the president make an address, even if we didn't agree with the president, because that was our duty as a citizen. With this guy, so many people do not know what's going to come out of his mouth. Is he going to attack immigrants? Is he going to go after people of color? Is he going to belittle someone in his own party or in the other party? Things that you don't want your kids to say, things you don't want your kids to hear. For me, it is best exemplified by an Iowan. And I mentioned this at the debate. Someone that grew up at Primgar, Iowa, the son of immigrants, humble beginnings, who ended up going to Grinnell College and then on to become the highest lawyer, the counsel for the United States Army. And when Joseph McCarthy was having those hearings and he was going after people because of their political beliefs, or even if they didn't have those beliefs because he wanted to say they had those beliefs, or getting them blacklisted so that they couldn't work, people were afraid to stand up to him. They were especially afraid at those hearings because the limelight was on it. There was one man, a man named Joseph Welch from Primgar, Iowa, who stood up. He was the one that said, "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you no sense of decency?" That's this moment for our country. It is a decency check. And the facts are there. When I look at some of the people I've met out there, I think of this rancher from Minnesota who, and this was my first sign of this, he took me on a tour on his ATV of his cattle ranch, and we're dodging all these big cows. And I think to myself, this is not a good way for me to die. And we're like going in and out, and finally it's time to go inside. And we're standing in there, everyone's left, the media's left, and he looks at me and he says, "You know, we voted for Trump." And I said, "What do you mean, your family, the ranchers?" And he said, "No, I don't like to talk about myself that much, so I just say we." And he said, "We voted for Trump because we were mad about health care." And he said, and then I saw him stand in front of the wall. And I said, "Oh, no, they haven't built the wall." And he says, no, the day after the inauguration, the CIA wall. That was when Trump, and this guy remembers this, the day after he's inaugurated, gives this incredibly partisan speech about the size of his crowd in front of this sacred wall that's covered in the stars of CIA agents who we don't even know their names, anonymous CIA agents, each star for one of them who died in the line of duty. And he chose that sacred place to make a partisan political speech. And this guy noticed. And then he said, and then after that, the last straw for me was the Boy Scout Jamboree. And that was when, some of you remember, I remember this because my husband was a Boy Scout. My husband, by the way, grew up in Mankato. His parents had 4 boys and they wanted girls. So His mom got pregnant again and had identical twin boys. So they had 6 boys. They have 6 boys. And at the time, they grew up in a trailer home in triple bunk beds. And they all became Eagle Scouts, 5 of the 6 of them. And I never say which one didn't make it because I don't want to embarrass my husband. And so that meant a lot to me. This guy brings us up. He said, when Trump gave that speech in front of all those young people, that partisan speech, at a place that you don't do that, he said, that was it for me. I decided what I did, it wasn't patriotic. Or this guy in New Hampshire was in a long line of people in Conway, New Hampshire, in kind of a rural area, long line of our great base. They've got stickers on. The stickers say, I'm a Supreme Court voter. I'm a climate change voter. I'm a reproductive rights voter. Guy comes up in a brown jacket. He doesn't have a sticker on. I say, sir, I'm joking around. You don't have a sticker on. And he leans down. He goes, that's because I was a Trump voter, and my neighbors don't know. So don't say anything right now. But I am not doing it again. So I give you this profound advice, and it is not just based on my stories. I think you know people like this, and you also know people in our base that stayed home because they just weren't that excited, or you know people that were independent that maybe voted for other people. A lot of people did that in my state. And I've got the facts on my side. Look at what happened after the Trump election. Look at what happened where we now have a Democratic governor in the state of Kansas named Laura Kelly, or Gretchen Whitmer in the state of Michigan, or your 2 great representatives out of Iowa that you elected to Republican seats in Cindy and Abby, right? That happened. That all happened. Or even more recently, and by the way, my favorite story of can we win in the Midwest? 4 profound words. Former Governor Scott Walker. Then you go to more recently, Virginia, diverse slate of candidates all through that state. We win back the state House and the state Senate. Then you go down to Louisiana, where a Democratic governor gets reelected. Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell has now a Democratic governor. And you know what those 2 states in common have, besides being more red than Iowa? And if we can win there, we can win there. They have in common that the night before, guess who went to campaign for their opponents? Donald Trump. So my one question is, where can we send him next? That happened, and a lot of that was our fired up base, but it was also moderate Republicans and independents. So I leave you with this piece of advice from all of this. It is this: we better not screw this up, because we have people that want to come with us, that want to march with us, that want to vote with us, but they may not agree with us on every single point. Secondly, how we talk about him. So to many of us, he's a bully, racist, you name it. But to some of the workers that I talked to out there, Pennsylvania, carpenters, Western Pennsylvania, by the way, Pennsylvania went for Donald Trump. I went on this blue wall tour of the states that he had won, Pennsylvania, Michigan, where I talked to dock workers, dairy farmers in Wisconsin, Ohio, of course, Iowa, Minnesota, where she won, but she got the lowest percentage in the country. So I came up with this grand plan that we are going to build a beautiful blue wall around those Midwestern states, including ours, and we're going to make Donald Trump pay for it. When you look and talk to people in those states, they don't always talk about him as a bully, these workers. They think of it this way. They say, you know what? I work really hard. And when things go wrong for me, I just got to work harder. When I can't afford insulin, or my kid gets into college and I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford it, or I have to then take out more of a loan on my mortgage, I got to figure it out, or my wife has to get another job, or my husband has to go work more hours. That's what they say. And then they look at this guy and they say, you know what? He has the best job in the world. He gets to live in this nice house. He, as I've explained to them, in the course of his life, gets $413 million from his dad. That's his family trust. That's how he builds his life. And by the way, I cannot wait to be on the debate stage with him and say, that's how you started? How about me? My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground. He had to quit school when he was in middle school to go work pulling a wagon and then in the underground mines because his parents were sick and he had 9 brothers and sisters and he was the oldest boy and he raised them basically. The youngest had to go to an orphanage and he said he'd go get her and he borrowed a car and 2 years later he went to Duluth and brought her back. Then he married my grandma Mary and they had 2 kids, my dad and his brother, and my grandpa and grandma saved money in a coffee can in the basement to send my dad to a 2-year community college. That was our family's trust. And $413 million does not fit in a coffee can. I figure when you are given an opportunity and an opportunity like that from someone, whether it's your grandparents or your parents, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a coworker, whether it is a neighbor, you do not go into the world with a sense of entitlement. You go into the world with a sense of obligation, an obligation to lift people up instead of slamming them down, an obligation to lift people up instead of hoarding it for yourself. So when people out there that maybe voted for him or stayed home or voted for someone, when they look at this, they think, you know what? When things go wrong for me, I just have to work harder. What does this guy do when things go wrong? Many of it's self-inflicted wounds with his trade war or with what he did with the oil companies, granting them those waivers so it hurts our biofuel business here in Iowa and in Minnesota and throughout the country. What does he do? He blames other people. Think about it. Who does he really like to blame? Barack Obama. He blames Barack Obama for all kinds of things. Who else does he blame? This is one of my favorites. The head of the Federal Reserve. He appointed him. That guy's just trying to do his job. One of the worst ones, he blames the whole entire city of Baltimore. Those kids have to wake up in the morning and hear that this president of the United States has called their city rat infested. Or, my all-time favorite, the entire country of Denmark. Who does that? That's what he does. Or he's at the NATO conference and the world leaders are caught on tape making jokes about him. By the way, I have heard so much worse in the U.S. Senate when they make jokes about each other all the time, even ones they like. And this guy, I just didn't think that was that big a deal. Big surprise that they were making jokes about him. What does he do? Instead of making jokes back, he is so thin-skinned, he quits. He leaves the conference. The work isn't done. America doesn't quit. So when you think about it, and you are talking to people all the time that are going to be voting in the general election that need to hear about this, I want you to think about how you talk about him. The broken promises he has made to people about bringing prescription drug costs down, broken promises on health care, broken promises on infrastructure, especially in this town where you need that infrastructure. And he said he was going to build on election night. That was one of his top things he said he was going to get done. I remember hearing it because I'm in this horrible mood, and I'm watching this thing. I go, well, at least he said infrastructure. He has not done that investment because he's afraid to talk about how he's going to pay for it. Third thing, optimistic economic agenda for this country. That got lost in 2016. It got lost because he took us down one big rabbit hole after another, and everyone kind of went after him, and we lost our own message and our own economic agenda. We know what it is, and people are with us in a big way. Number one, health care, bringing down the cost of premiums. I know you've heard, anyone that watched the debates have heard this debate. And I am a little tired of the debate because as I finally pointed out to my friend Bernie, 2/3 of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate are not on the Medicare for All bill. It is fine to talk about it. It is worth it to talk about it, but it's not a real debate. It really isn't. Most of the House members that got elected that were in tough districts that put Nancy Pelosi in as Speaker, they are not even on that bill. They do not support it. So let's look at realism here. Reality check. The President of the United States, the Affordable Care Act, is now 10 points more popular than Donald Trump. That is a good place to start with the Affordable Care Act. I do not think, as coming from a river town, I live 8 blocks from the Mississippi River, coming from a river area, when we want to cross the river, what do? We build a bridge. We don't blow one up. So how can we make the Affordable Care Act better? Number one, nonprofit public option. It's what Barack Obama wanted to do from the very beginning. Number two, take on farmer prices in a big way. If you wonder why these prices are so high, look at the loss. What they did is unbelievable. This is before my time. But when they were considering what to do about Medicare, the pharma companies had the clout, 2 lobbyists for every member of Congress, to get a provision written into law that Medicare, on behalf of 43 million American seniors, cannot negotiate for better prices. They did that. Medicaid can, VA can, but Medicare cannot. I lead the bill to lift that prohibition. I have 34 co-sponsors, and as president, I can get it done. Bringing in less expensive drugs from other countries. In Minnesota, we can see Canada from our porch. This was actually a bill that I have. It's interesting, this bill, and it's why I know well, first of all, I know I can get it done because this is one thing a president can do without Congress that is legal. You can actually get waivers to bring in less expensive drugs from other countries. But when we had a vote on this, it was Klobuchar Sanders. When Bernie and I did this at midnight, I guess no one was watching, but 14 Republicans voted for it. That's true. Then, if you don't believe that, Grassley has a bill with me now. So that is something we can get done. $350 billion is saved by simply putting a cap on pharma prices. The House has this bill that's tied to the international average. $350 billion in 10 years. Think about how much also would be saved by consumers with copays. That's just what's paid for taxpayers. They literally think they own Washington, and they do. It's nearly 20% of our health care costs now. In some areas, it's as much as the hospital costs. So that's what we're dealing with. That's the number one focus. Next, addiction, mental health. I'm the first candidate that came out with a comprehensive plan because I saw the devastating effects of addiction, because I know how mental health still has so much stigma, when yet 1 in 5 Americans struggle with mental health sometime in their life. For me, it's personal. My dad, when I was growing up, struggled with alcoholism. By the time John and I got married, he had 3 DWIs. At that point, the judge looked at him and said, look, you got to choose jail or treatment. And he chose treatment, and it changed his life. And in his words, he was pursued by grace. Because of his family, the treatment he got, his faith, he has been now sober, and he is 91 years old since that time. He is in assisted living. His AA group comes to him, and as he said to me a year ago, it's hard to get a drink around here anyway. And I just think everyone has that same right to be pursued by grace. I do. And how do we pay for this? There's going to be huge settlements coming in from those opioid companies. It's going to be like the tobacco settlement. Maybe not like that legally, in that there'll be a master settlement, and the money should go, in my mind, to all forms of addiction and mental health. You only have 64 public mental health beds in the state of Iowa. So you wonder why people are waiting in hospitals. You wonder why the most horrible statistic that in the United States of America, we have had a 30% increase in suicides in just 15 years. We don't have enough counselors in schools. We don't have enough help through insurance companies that should be covering it, and we don't have enough public mental health beds. Next challenge we have with health care, long-term care. I had so much fun bringing this up on that debate stage because no one is talking about it. We are seeing a doubling of our senior population. This isn't just about seniors. It's also about families who are helping with aging parents and their own kids. It means strong Medicaid. It means strong Social Security. But it also means putting incentives in place for long-term care insurance, reducing the premiums, helping people to plan ahead and get long-term care insurance, and then making it easier for them to pay for long-term care when they're at home, which saves the government a ton of business, a ton of money. What does this mean? A lot of interesting ways we got from this. More long-term care workers. It means more home health care workers. We are going to have in our country over 1 million openings for home health care workers in the next 10 years that we don't know how to fill. We're going to have over 100,000 openings for nursing assistants. And by the way, we're going to have over 70,000 openings for electricians. We are not going to have a shortage of MBAs. We're going to have a shortage of plumbers. So what we need to do is figure out, and I always like to tease my colleagues up there on the stage, I actually don't think they're thinking big enough. If you think big enough, you don't just have a bumper sticker solution with free college for all. If you think big enough, you think, what are our economic needs, and how do we match our education system to those needs? That means, obviously, investment in K through 12. It means free 1- and 2-year degrees. It means doubling Pell Grants to make it easier to go to college, so the money goes to people that need it, up to $100,000. I'd put it up that high. And it certainly means giving people the dignity of work so that they can take those jobs we need them to take, like home health care workers. That means childcare, all of those things, because that is our future. And I think that's how you think big. You look at what we need and what people need. With long-term care, it also means strengthening, as I said, how you pay for it. And I got a great way to do that. You can see it on my website. But my dad, just to end his story, he somehow got long-term care insurance. I don't know who sold it to him, but it's what's now paying for him to stay in this place he is with 15 people in this house where he's really happy. I know exactly when that money ends, in like a year and a half or 2 years. After that, he has some savings. He got married 3 times, whole nother story, so there's not as much savings as there should be. But then he goes on to Medicaid. And I know exactly that date. And I've already talked to Catholic Elder Care, and they said they would take him in. Our story is actually so much better than so many other families that didn't get the long-term care insurance. But we have to make it easier for people to plan ahead. Other challenges, I mentioned education, immigration reform. Immigrants don't diminish America, they are America. And we had a bill that passed with Chuck Grassley's support in 2013, supported by the AFL-CIO, because people will come out of the shadows and will be able to pay taxes, and it reduces the deficit by $158 billion in 10 years. Supported by the Chamber, supported by the migrant groups, supported by the Farmers Union and the Farm Bureau. What happened? Got stuck in John Boehner's freezer next to the frozen peas. Well, Nancy Pelosi now has that freezer. Maybe not really, but it sounds good. So we can get this done. And I know how to do this because I've been involved. When President Bush was in and wanted to get it done, I was in that group. When Barack Obama was in and wanted to get it done, I was on the Judiciary Committee. There are Republicans that want to move on this. Obviously, there's Democrats that want to move on it. All we need is a president that people aren't afraid of, and we can get it done. Another challenge, climate change. And you are seeing it big time in Iowa. I think one of the best things we can do is make the argument from the Midwest. Yeah, there's coastal big problems. There's hurricanes. There's fires in California. But there's also big problems in our part of the world, in the heartland. There are weird weather events, increase in homeowners insurance, flooding like you've seen in Davenport and like they've seen on the other side of Iowa, infrastructure that we're going to have to pay for. And this guy just keeps talking about infrastructure. He doesn't do anything, and then he also doesn't do anything about climate change. Get back into the International Climate Change Agreement on day one. Do something about the clean power rules, bring those back. You can do all this without Congress. Bring back the gas mileage standards, pass sweeping legislation to put a price on carbon, and here's the key, make sure that the dividends we bring in go back to the people directly. We're going to bring in a ton of money by putting a fee on carbon or doing a renewable electricity standard across the country. You can do it a lot of different ways. But we have to make sure that the people who are going to have to pay more for heating and for cooling and everything else get that money, or we're never going to be able to pass it. And that's really a common belief of how we do this. So what happens when we do it that way? And what happens when we put incentives in place for manufacturing jobs in places? People will be for it. But it has to be ironclad, and they have to be comfortable that it's going to work. And what happens also? New technology develops. You guys call yourself the Saudi Arabia of wind. So does North Dakota, but we won't tell them. And you've already seen some of the effects of that. We can do even more. The technology that's going to get us to carbon neutral, we probably don't know what it is right now. But do you think that the world knew what Norman Borlaug had in his head when he decided how he's going to feed 1 billion people and save them from starvation? That guy from Iowa? No. He did it. One person did it. And so we need to put those incentives in place. Infrastructure. I have a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. It's paid for by rolling back a lot of those regressive parts of the Republican tax bill. Just so you know, he took the corporate tax rate from the mid-30s and put it at 21%. Every point he went down, and I think the businesses thought it was going to be around 26, 27, was $100 billion. So even if you take 4 points of that and put it into infrastructure, you go up to 25%, $400 billion right there for infrastructure. You can get $150 billion for infrastructure simply by going back to the international tax rate like it was under Barack Obama. You can do a infrastructure financing authority, which is already a bipartisan bill, Buy America Bonds, which is already a bipartisan bill, and you get over $1 trillion. He is just afraid. He said he was going to do it, and every time they meet with him about it, he blows it up. And when he signed that tax bill, you know what he did? He went down to Mar-a-Lago and he said to his friends in this fancy ballroom, "You just got a lot richer." Were any of you there? Okay. I just didn't want to embarrass anyone. I actually don't think anyone from the whole state of Iowa was in that room. And what you can do is take some of that money and put it into infrastructure to pay for the retaining walls and everything you need here, or whatever Cindy calls them, to make that work. You can do that. So the last thing that I want to say is that we need a candidate who can bring this country together and bring our party together and win. That's the number one thing that unites us right now. And I will make my case. I have won every race, every place, every time. I have won in the reddest of districts, including the one that borders Iowa, that is held by a Republican congressman, in double digits. I have won this. I have won the district that borders North and South Dakota 3 times, including running against an existing congressman. I have won in northern Minnesota, where the steelworkers are, every single time, and I have won in Michelle Bachmann's district every single time. And I have done it not by selling out on my values, but by understanding these 31 counties in Iowa that went to Barack Obama and then went to Donald Trump, by meeting people where they are. It is the reason I am still standing on that debate stage. People know it. And last I'd say is there are 5 million people in Minnesota. Call them for a job reference. They will not all have voted for me. They will not agree with everything I say, but they will tell you I get things done. I've passed over 100 bills where I'm the lead Democrat, more than anyone in Congress running for the presidency. I have been able to get things done, be honest with people, and gain their trust. I can't think of anything we need more right now than gaining trust back in the White House and in our government. So that is my plea to you. I think that's why we're on the rise. I think that's why people are willing to show up on the coldest night of the year, almost. I think that is why we're getting so many people to sign those commit to caucus cards. Isn't that nice how I threw that in? Just kind of, we would love you to do that for me tonight. And I will end with this. You know I have another obligation. And this impeachment trial starts on Tuesday. And we already were sworn in. The Chief Justice was there. And it is a very, very serious thing. And we are so frustrated that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans right now are refusing to call witnesses. There is nothing like this in American history where an administration has literally stopped everything. 0 witnesses, never happened before. 0 documents. All we are asking for is 4 witnesses. And if the president claims he's so innocent that he should be exonerated and not impeached, why is he afraid to have them come forward? The acting chief of staff that made the decision to stop the aid from going to Ukraine. John Bolton, who says he wants to testify, who was the gatekeeper for all of this national security. The guy that sent the smoking gun email just 90 minutes after the president talked to the head of Ukraine that said whatever it was, that hold back the aid, keep this closely held. We have not even been able to ask that guy questions. That is what this is about. And if the Republicans are not going to allow us to even call witnesses, regardless of what the decision is that comes out of this, they may as well hand Donald Trump a scepter and a crown. Our founding fathers, they broke off from England because they didn't want to be ruled by a monarchy. They didn't want to have a king. And that is literally what they are making him. In America, as Thomas Paine has said, the law is king. The president is not king. So that is what's going on here. And I have this job. I'm one of only 100 jurors. And in that way, I represent you. I represent all of America. But you are jurors in another way. All of these things I've talked about here with the decency check, with a president that shouldn't be allowed to put his private interests in front of the interests of our country. Yeah, it's about an impeachment proceeding, but it is much bigger than that. It is about this very election. So I am asking you to help me. I picked the color green for a reason. It was Paul Wellstone's color, and he was one of my mentors. He was Tom Harkin's best friend in the U.S. Senate, and he would drive around in this green bus all the time. He had no money compared to his opponent. No one thought he was going to win, and his opponent didn't run $10 million Super Bowl ads like one of mine, but it was almost that close. And what Paul would do and how he won this and came from behind is he would run these ads where he would talk really, really fast, just that I have less money than my opponent, so I'm talking really, really fast. And then he would run back and forth all the time in these parades. That was how he won. It was that energy, and he was the people's senator. Years go by, he's up for re-election, and it's the last year of his life before he and his wife Sheila perish in this tragic, tragic plane crash. He took a brave, brave vote that year. He was the only senator in a tough, tough election that voted against the Iraq War. And he did that, and he was going to win. It was a few weeks out when the plane crashed. And I remember this year because I had no opponent. It sounds really nice right now. For county attorney in my reelection. So I spent a lot of my time with Paul. And what I remember from that year was not the tragic day, which everyone knows where they were in Minnesota. What I most remember is the memory of him in the parades after he announced he had MS, and he was in a lot of pain, and he couldn't run anymore back and forth. And he and Sheila would stand on that back of that green bus, and they would wave. But here's the amazing part. They had energized so many people in these green shirts to run around that bus, hundreds of people that over the years were there for him, that you didn't even notice he wasn't running himself. We have like 2 weeks before the Iowa caucuses, and I am asking you to join Cindy and to join Rita and to run for me. We are a grassroots campaign. We're not, no one even expected me to be still standing on that stage, I can tell you. But that is because I never have stopped believing that we can win the right way. And the right way is a way that brings people with us instead of shutting them out. And I've been willing to say that from the beginning, that if you are tired of the noise and nonsense in our politics, if you are tired of the extreme in our politics, you have a home with me. So I welcome you to this home, and I hope you'll help me out. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Now, we have some questions. I think the staff got really nervous when I said that they'd come out and start your cars, so they want me to do like 3. Let's see what this is. Let's see. Okay. Okay, this is from Henry. Where are you, Henry? There he is, right there. Do you want to say the question yourself? Okay, good. For the last several years, those who preach hate have been more emboldened and actively engaged. This is true. This isn't just stories. There's been a major increase in hate crimes. I actually asked the FBI director at a Judiciary Committee hearing about it about 6 months ago. How would, as president, you counteract this epidemic of hate and bring our nation back to being a compassionate, moral, and just society in which all people are included and respected? That's a beautiful question. Thank you. So this increase in hate is lodged against a lot of people. The anti-Semitism is on the rise. You see it in that horrific shooting in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pennsylvania. You see it in the recent tragedy where a guy goes into a rabbi's house, starts stabbing people. Hanukkah. You see it at the mosque in Minnesota, where they actually, 2 white nationalists came in, or I think, 2, and bombed the mosque. Thankfully, no one was killed. That was just in the last few years. You see it with really anyone that looks different. It's not always acts of violence. Sometimes it's bullying. And it is somehow unleashed in the last few years. And the words that you see of Donald Trump and the things he's saying, as well as where people are and the division, has led to this increase in hate. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I remember hearing from a family in Minnesota, and they said that the parents were Somali, and they had actually been in my state through 9/11. When after 9/11, what does George Bush do? He tells his U.S. attorneys to go out there with people like me, who is the local county attorney, go to the mosques and tell people, don't be scared. We're going to stand up for you. We understand this what happened doesn't reflect where you are and where your religion is. That happened. That's what George Bush did. This president, the opposite. So this family who had been there, the parents, through 9/11 had no discrimination. Nothing happened through that time. Fast forward to the height of the rhetoric. During the Trump race, they got to dinner in Minnesota with their 2 little kids. A guy walks by and says, you 4 go home. You go home to where you came from. The little girl looks up at her mom, and she says, Mom, I don't want to go home to eat tonight. You said we could eat out tonight. You think of the words of that innocent child. She didn't even know what he was talking about because she only knows one home. That's my state. That's your state. That's the United States of America. So what is the answer? The first, of course, comes from the top. It's the rhetoric. It's stopping the mean tweets at 3 a.m. in his bathrobe. It is having a president that sees decency as a major motivating force from the very beginning. That's part of why I did this 100-day plan, 137 things that I can do without Congress that are legal, and put it out there, because I think you want to have action, you want to build trust, and you want to know what a president's going to do. The second thing about it, as my former prosecutor background, and someone that actually did a lot with hate crimes, it's ramping up, putting an attorney general in place. It's going to make this a priority, work with local law enforcement, making sure you've got money toward prevention and education and all of those kinds of things. And a lot of times it's the local police on the front line that are going to spot some of this, that hears about a kid in school that's having trouble, that can look into this. It's not always coming from the federal government. Just so you know my background with hate crimes, when I was the Hennepin County attorney for years, I took on a number of cases, including one where a guy, a boss on a manufacturing floor, hit a guy over a head with a 2x4 for speaking Spanish. I had another one where a guy said he was going to go out and kill a black kid on Martin Luther King Day, which of course is the celebration of Martin Luther King's life that we're heading into this weekend. By the way, that guy did it. Thankfully, he didn't kill the kid, but he shot a kid, and I took that case on. And so I had done enough that when Bill Clinton was president and he was rolling out the hate crimes bill, the Matthew Shepard's hate crime bill, which of course was named after Matthew Shepard, who was found the bystander who first saw him hanging on the fence post where he had been murdered and maimed, thought he was a scarecrow. That's how badly he looked. And that case was what motivated us to do this hate crimes bill that included LGBTQ protections. So anyway, long story short, somehow I'm invited to the White House with a few other prosecutors when Bill Clinton rolls this out. I have never even been in the White House before, not even on a tour. I get a call the night before. They said there's been a change. I literally said, am I not invited? I was so excited to be there. They go, no, we want you to introduce the president at the event. I remember I scribbled this introduction. I show up with my little plastic folder. I am standing outside. They have this huge event with the military band because I'm standing outside with Bill Clinton on one side, really tall, Janet Reno on the other, and they start playing, Hail to the Chief, do, 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 do. I start walking in, and all of a sudden I feel this big hand on my shoulder, and this voice says, I know you're going to do great out there, but when they play that song, I usually go first. That is a true story, which he remembers. So that was my first time to the White House, but it will not be my last. Okay. All right. Lisa Hale from Long Grove. Let's see. Oh, this is good because it's on foreign policy. Where are you? Right here. What steps can be done in your presidency to get the USA back in alliance with our strategic partners relating to defense and economy? Really good question. So I actually gave a speech on this to the Council on Foreign Relations. You can find it on my website, my foreign policy, and what I want to do, I call it the 5 R's, not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the 5 R's. 1, renewing our leadership around the world. 2, repairing our relationships with our allies, and that needs a lot of work. 3, renegotiating ourselves back into international agreements. I'll get more on that in a while. 4 would be responding appropriately to threats around the world, which means like when you're trying to negotiate something in Afghanistan and we should bring our troops home, you don't put out a tweet when there's no agreement inviting the Taliban to Camp David. Our president actually did that. And then 5, reasserting American values and our leadership and the values that we have, which means when a journalist for an American newspaper is slaughtered, is killed and dismembered with clear evidence pointing to the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, do you cut off all relations with that country? No. But do you make very clear that there is some response, that America will be firm and stand up for the First Amendment and stand up for human rights, not just abuses, but atrocities? Yes, this president didn't do that. When it comes to the international agreements, I'll talk a little bit about trade at the end. There are many things he has done wrong, but one of the scariest things he's done is really literally leaving our allies and standing with dictators. He's done it time and time again. I used the Putin example. So what should we do? Number one, I mentioned one already, renegotiate ourselves back into the International Climate Change Agreement. That we don't even have to, we just have to sign it. I can do that on day one, which is what I will do. When he got us out of it, only Syria and Nicaragua were not in the agreement. They have now gotten in the agreement. So we are the only ones. Number two, the Iranian nuclear ban agreement. I supported that agreement. I didn't think it was perfect, but even some people that didn't support it didn't think that we should have precipitously gone out of it. Everything, when I stood on the first debate stage in Miami, we were asked, what do we see as the biggest threats? I was the only one that said, well, a few people said China, which I did when it comes to the economy, but then I was the only one that said Iran because of Donald Trump, because he had taken us out of that agreement. Everything I predicted has come true. Our allies have been left holding the bag. In Europe, we've given more leverage to China and Russia. Iran has gained a foothold for unrelated reasons because of the president's bad decision to take 150 troops out of the Syrian border, and that has happened now. We've given them more power. We've seen a complete escalation of violence, as you know, from what's happened in the last few months. And so I would work to renegotiate ourselves back in that agreement, and there are improvements that we can make to it. Russian nuclear agreements. He took us out of that, making the world a lot less safe. One of those agreements we could try to get back in. The other is coming up in the first year of a new president's term. That's the New START Treaty. It's something I'd negotiate ourselves back into. When it comes to trade, I believe that we have to have fair trade, but we must have trade. Over 90% of our potential customers are outside of our borders. Something very interesting happened this past month with the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. When we first got it, it wasn't in that great a shape, but thanks to my friend Sherrod Brown and Nancy Pelosi and others, we got some stronger provisions, particularly for labor, some for the environment, but also getting rid of a sweetheart pharmaceutical deal. And I voted for that agreement. I think it's important that we put these higher standards in. I think we can even do better, and I hope that it will at least be a beginning to some new standards we can put in other agreements. Why did I vote for it? Well, I think most fundamentally, we have to have a North American trading bloc. If we're really going to deal with China, we've got to have some friends. And the other piece of it is I lead the American-Canadian Interparliamentarian Group. No, I have not noted this on the debate stage because it would take up my whole 30 seconds. But I have done a lot with Canada. And when Canada was being pushed out of the agreement, I brought 15 senators over to the Canadian embassy, half Democrats, half Republicans, to push and reach out to the Canadians. And that started a very good discussion that led to some of my Republican colleagues working with the White House to get some provisions in there. But I think that the answer is I voted for some trade agreements, didn't vote for others. I think you want a president that is going to negotiate on behalf of the American people. And we want to be making stuff and inventing things in America and exporting to the world. That should be our goal. And when we hold something made in America in our hands, we are holding quality, we are holding equality for workers, and we are holding the hopes and dreams of the American people. So we must do all we can to make sure we're making things here and exporting them abroad. And the way you do that is with fair trade agreements. Well, I might do one more, but I'll just do it shorter. These are long questions. Okay, let's see. The question is from Catherine of Davenport. It's about supporting the needs of our elder Americans without alienating and overburdening those younger, which is a really good question. And she ends, thank you for coming to Davenport tonight. Okay, where are you, Catherine, with that thank you, with that nice note? So I think I went through the long-term care issue. A few other things I'd add is that our seniors, a lot of them actually want to volunteer, want to work. Part-time, we need workers. I said this at an event in New Hampshire, and these two women go, I go, what's wrong? They go, oh, we actually work and we want to retire. But there are a lot of seniors that do want to work part-time, and I think we should encourage that. Some of that is housing in town so they can more easily get to jobs, and then that free up sometimes housing where they live. Sometimes it just means transportation. The other piece of it is all the long-term care issues I raised, keeping Social Security strong. It's going to start paying out 10 to 15% less by 2034. The way to shore it up is really simple and elegant. There's a payroll tax that ends at $133,000 a year. If you want, you can do a donut hole and have it start again at $250,000 in income and keep going from there. If you do that, you keep it strong into perpetuity. Other things, Alzheimer's, fastest, most expensive disease in America. By 2050, 14 million people are going to have Alzheimer's. And that puts a huge burden on caretakers. I'm sure you know people that have Alzheimer's, and the hardest, of course, is the early onset Alzheimer's. And so to me, the answer is making sure we're putting money into a cure. There's been some great research being done, including in my state. It means helping caretakers. One of my long-term care plans is with a $6,000 tax credit for caretakers of anyone with any disease. And then the third thing is communities actually understanding the devastating effects of this disease and what we need to do. But I actually think this senior question, which has been neglected by so many people without really thinking through our new challenges, is a great opportunity to figure out things that we can do better and be smarter. Okay, should I just do one more? Okay. Let's see. Do you favor $15 an hour wage? I do. That's from Alan. And I think you have to, is that you? Where? Okay. Okay, yeah, right there. And I think you have to implement it, phase it in, understanding the difference between rural and major urban areas. I did long-term care. I'm just kind of obsessed with getting through them. Let's see. We talked about climate change. Let's see. Yes, climate change. I think I did that one. Oh, here's one on a thing. Okay, here's a good one to end with. If you get the nomination, sorry about the ones I didn't get to, you will have to debate Trump on stage. Yes. How will you handle him when he stalks around behind you while you are speaking? You know what? This is on a lot of people's minds. I'll get to this. It really is, because they remember that moment. And Hillary was great in those debates. She won those debates. But I was at a number of those debates. Well, one with Trump and some in the primary. Spouts lies, profanity, name-calling. He's told over 15,000 lies. That doesn't include the ones today. I don't know what he did today. And he can be intimidating. I agree. So that is really, I think, the big question in people's minds. They try to think of the different candidates, and they think, okay, how is that person going to be on the stage? So I think what you do is, first of all, I hope you've seen in these debates that I am tough. There was an article in the New York Times today that I enjoyed reading. I didn't even know that she knew this story. It was my first debate with my opponent, who was, we got like the most heated debates in Minnesota History Award. And she said to me at one point, remember the Iron Range where my grandpa's from, where my dad grew up? She said, "You're nothing but a street fighter from the Iron Range." And I said, "Thank you." So, I think that you need someone tough that can stand up to him in the moment. Now, that doesn't always mean going down to his level, right? Remember when Michelle Obama said, when he goes low, we go high? Well, I'd add to this, when he goes low, we vote, okay? And so sometimes it means taking him on in a very aggressive way. Sometimes it just means ignoring him. And this is not just on the debate stage. He always wants to distract people every single day. He literally did one of those summits with Kim Jong-un. He's done a few, where there was no plan for it. He had no deliverables, and he just went out, and it looks to me like he was trying to distract people from other things. He does that all the time. So it is really important to keep with this optimistic economic agenda that we have talked about. The third thing, and this is really key, is to be able to respond in the moment, which I hope that you have seen me do on that debate stage. Because you've got to be able, first of all, your whole campaign, and we've all learned this, to be much more dealing with all of the social media and the lies that we're going to see out there and the fake videos. Okay, but then let's just go to the debate stage. I think so much of it is to be able to, in a moment in time, point out how absurd he is. You don't think he's funny, but he uses humor, and we just don't think it's funny. You have to use some humor. So I give you some examples. When I announced in the middle of that snowstorm and talked about many things, including climate change, he sent out a tweet and gave me a nickname and made fun of me and called me Snow Woman, which I actually thought was kind of good, and made fun of me for talking about climate change in the middle of a blizzard. I wrote back. I wrote this myself in the airport as I was heading out to do interviews after my announcement. I said, the science is on my side, Donald Trump, and I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard. It is doing things like when he said that he wanted to buy Greenland. I said, one of these things is, one of these things is not for sale. Donald Trump or Greenland? Answer, Greenland. And I just really think that you have to be able to, in that moment, respond to what he does and have the ability to do that. I think we cannot underrate that. And the final thing is, which there's been some discussion about lately for, I'll just say, various reasons, a Minnesota euphemism, is about a woman dealing with him. I think a lot of people think, oh, look at him. Can a woman beat him? I first point out the facts that Nancy Pelosi does it every single day. The second is that you don't have to be the tallest person in the room. You don't have to be the skinniest person in the room. We need to start thinking about these women that have been incredible, that have won races in really hard districts and brought people with them. And I have the receipts to show that I can do that based on my past elections. But one of the interesting things about me is I actually have done really well with male voters in my state. You can look at the numbers. And there was a poll done of who would beat Donald Trump the most in Minnesota, which is the state, as people get to know me more, where they know me best. I beat him after he almost won in our state. This was just a public poll a month and a half ago. I beat him by 17 points, 8 points more than anyone else in the race, more with men than anyone else in the race. So actually, when I have won, I've been the first woman in every one of my jobs. I am proud to do that, and I would be certainly proud to be the first woman president. But that is not how I'm running. I run on my merits. And I remember when I was first running for the Senate, I'd go up to northern Minnesota and speak to rooms of men, steelworkers, and they didn't have hardly any women elected to anything. And I would try things like I'd say, well, they'd say, could a woman win? Because our party had put up 2 women and they hadn't won over one each decade. And I said, well, yeah, I'd try this. I go, a woman won in Texas, so I think a woman can win in our state. They'd still be like this. And then I'd say, well, you know, I'm proud to be a woman candidate, but I'm running as my record, you know, still like this. Then finally I'd say, well, I'd try this final thing. I'd go, well, I'm proud to be a woman candidate, but I'm not running on that. I'm running on my merits, because last time I checked, half the voters were men, and if I was just running as a woman, I wouldn't win. And they go, yeah. Now, I am not using that in this race, but I think the point is the point. The point is that people want a president that's going to have their backs. They want someone who runs on merit, and I've got the merit, and that is that I can win, and that is that I'm able to get things done for them. And I think it's an important thing not to get lost in this whole debate. Is that the major thing that we're looking for as someone on the head of the ticket? So I want to thank you, and thank you for having the grace to listen and be so polite. Again, make my one last pitch to your county and to this great town. I would love to have your support, and you can just sign those commit to caucus forms, or you can say I'm 78% with you. Either one is good. Anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We will do, you want to do?
Thank you all for coming. We will be doing photos up here. If you aren't able to come up here, we'll come to you, and then the line will start right there where Mitch is. Thank you.